We do record the session so that folks who can't be here in the moment have a chance to watch on YouTube later. Feel free to share those. We tend to post them in monthly newsletters, which I'll mention in just a minute, so you'll have the links to those soon. Are you guys able to see the poll?
Yes.
Okay. If folks want to go ahead and vote on that, and if it's not accessible or you just want to put that in chat, kind of who you are. Are you a farmer? Do you want to become a farmer? Are you a farm service provider, a researcher, an ag retailer, or something else? And what are some of the things you would be interested in exploring that have to do with soil health and regenerative ag? Things like funding opportunities for soil health practices, farmer-to-farmer networks, mixed species cover crops, farm diversification, things like that. I'll give that another moment or two, and then we'll close that out. This slide just captures a little bit about what the Million Acre Challenge is up to. It includes our soil health benchmark study, which is headed up by PASA, Association for Sustainable Agriculture, and Lisa Garfield at Future Harvest, who's here on the meeting with us. We also highlight networking opportunities like this one here, and things like our advanced farmer networks, which are designed to put producers in community with each other. The main takeaway is to know that we are a farmer-focused initiative. We really do see farmers as the experts. We recognize they're already doing a lot to steward the land, and our mission is to try to help them do more of that. All right, I'm going to end the poll. I'm not sure we had anybody weigh in there. I'm not seeing any results, so that's okay. We'll just carry on. This is just kind of a quick PSA. One of the things that we do encourage is that folks join the Million Acre Challenge. You do not have to be a farmer to do that. If you are a farmer who is managing land, whether it's owned or leased, you do have the opportunity to kind of catalog how many acres and some of the practices that you're using. It's not a way for us to check up on people. It's a way for us to kind of build community. In addition to other things that the Million Acre Challenge is doing, to the Lunch and Learns, which you're participating in today and occur every second Wednesday, featuring different production systems. We also send out a monthly newsletter, which is really chock full of soil health and regenerative ag information, including resources and funding, local events, regional events. And then we're also active on social media, if those are your thing. That QR code there, which you can access by aiming your camera at, will take you to our subscribe and follow page on our website so that you can stay connected with us. All right, getting closer to the real reason you're here. I'd like to just very briefly, but sincerely thank both of our guests, Shawn Smith and Carl Frase, for joining us. Carl farms about 80 acres in Caroline County. The largest percentage of his land is rented to Black Gold Farms to grow white potatoes. He also raises both field and sweet corn, soybeans, watermelon on rotation. He's a second-generation farmer who's interested in doing as well as he can to be both profitable and a good steward of his land. Shawn Smith began interning for NRCS in high school. He completed another internship while achieving his degree in natural resource sciences from the University of Maryland. And after 12 years as a conservation planner, he was promoted to district manager for Talbot Soil Conservation District in 2019. We are delighted to have both of you gentlemen here, and thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So our goal today is really to present an example of how a farmer like Carl might explore options to improve conservation efforts on their farm, while also potentially improving profitability by accessing cost share incentives that are offered through state and federal sources. We're going to talk with Carl and Shawn kind of going over these basic 4 questions. And as is always the case in these lunch and learns, the conversation tends to be pretty organic and kind of rogue, but we're gonna try to focus on these things so that when you leave here today, you'll have a better picture of how Carl is managing these things and how he might access additional resources. So in case you can't see my screen, the questions are: what is the current picture for the farm? Kind of what's already happening? What conservation measures are in place, if any? What are the farmers' conservation goals or resource concerns? And what are some options that they might want to consider? So, Carl, would you like to tell us a little bit about what's currently in production on your farm?
Right now we have some rye out, or radishes in corn stubble, and Black Gold has sprayed the ground to kill the grass and weeds, and they'll do some type of either disking or incorporate the corn stalks, might shred them and incorporate that in the soil, and then plant potatoes in it here in the next few weeks.
And other than their potatoes, will you be growing some other crops?
I'll have a little bit of field corn and soybeans this year.
Okay. And remind me, I think most of the acres are in potatoes?
Most of the acres are in potatoes this year. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. About how many? Something, just so people get a sense.
65 acres is what they're booked to have in potatoes.
Okay. That's great. And you have said that in years past, you've also rotated in things like sweet corn or watermelon. How do you make a decision about how those things show up in your rotation?
Like this, follow up behind the potatoes, we might have a crop of soybeans if they get the potatoes out soon enough. And then we'll go probably to field corn, watermelons. So we do have some sweet potatoes on occasion, and just rotate it. Could have soybeans.
Okay. Kind of depends on how the season evolves and how the weather treats you and all that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. All right. So this is kind of an aerial shot of Carl's property. Carl, do you want to tell us what we're seeing here?
We're looking from the south to the north direction towards the Chop Tank River's out in front of us. At the top of the picture, you can't see the river, but it's out there. And the field's kind of split in half. The irrigation system is a 5-tower, and it covers more than 65 acres of that particular block of ground. And sometimes we split it in half and rotate potatoes on one side, but this year I chose to and asked Black Gold if they would put potatoes in the whole thing. And so I'll have potatoes on all the main part of the farm, 65 acres, and the dry corners might have field corn or soybeans in this year.
And because it sort of jumps off the screen at us, tell us about that little spot there sort of over to the right that looks like it's not in production. What's going on there?
That was an old orchard at the time. It looks like a brown spot. I was an orchard at one time, and I keep it for wildlife and rabbit cover.
That's cool. Okay. So our next slide, I'm going to sort of hand off to Shawn to talk about, because this might be part of what would happen if Carl had walked into the soil conservation office.
Yeah, so what you're looking at is a soils map, which anyone can get on any piece of property throughout the United States by accessing the Web Soil Survey. This is kind of, well, we're tilted at an angle here, but this are the soil map units that are on Mr. Frase's farm fields. And this is extremely important to the conversation early on to kind of determine, you know, what's some areas that there may be a resource concern. So when someone like Mr. Frase steps into the conservation district office, they might not know the right questions to ask. And typically one of our conservation planners, their first kind of action to be taken is to get a soils map of the property. And again, this is a free of charge service that you can get online. And it's really just giving you an idea of the drainage classes, giving you a little bit of the soil texture. It's hard to see in the hydrologic soil group up there, but it gives you a kind of a breakdown of the predominant soils that you're going to expected to see on the property. Again, it's just kind of aids in the conversation. You know, what are some practices that might be applicable with these soils? In the case for Mr. Frase,
Uh-oh. The internet is playing tricks with us. While they're hopefully rejoining, I'll mention Shawn's offered that this soils slide is tilted, and I did that actually intentionally so that the view follows what the pictures look like. So I think it's pretty easy to see. If you go from this image to this one, you can see that wildlife cover area over here.
we're back.
Great.
Sorry.
No problem. It happens.
Difficulties on my end is kind of shut off.
So would you like me to advance on to the next one, or you want to say more about this one?
Well, I guess the key part of this is that we're looking at the drainage class, because your drainage is gonna play a huge part of what you can do with the property. So as you kind of noted, there's the 5-tier center pivot irrigation, which kind of means that we've got some soils out there that are prone to droughty conditions. So it's probably a well-drained soil. And so just by using this hydrologic soil group along with the map, you can kind of help facilitate these conservation measures and what to expect out there. Yes, if you would like to advance. So the next map on here is another tool that the districts can kind of use. This is a LiDAR map, which is your light detection and ranging, which basically means a satellite imagery. It's shooting a satellite signal down and then timing how fast it gets the signal back, and then that kind of correlates to elevation. So in this map, you're kind of see towards the lower left-hand side, there's a light blue. That's kind of the lowest elevation. This is all relative. And it looks extreme. I was just telling this to Mr. Frase. It looks really extreme, like there's a big mountaintop out there, but we're probably only changing, a foot in elevation over the whole property. But you can see kind of that water course that's on the left-hand side where they look like they put that ditch in, and then the other side down there by kind of the intersection of Tanier Road and Newton Road. No, that's not Newton
Tanier
Road.
and Bethlehem.
Bethlehem, sorry. Again, well, I'm in Caroline County, it's unfamiliar ground. No, but then, the highest part of the field is in that whiter area, kind of to the northeast corner. And again, this just kind of helps, okay, which way is the water flowing? And obviously, Mr. Frase knows all this information, having been on the farm. But as a conservation planner and a district, we don't always have access to that information that we can just pull from our recall. We've got to have some tools. And again, this kind of, after our conversation, this kind of helps out to figure out, okay, what are the areas that may be impacted when you have a lot of water coming down on the farm.
So I think Shawn and Carl, one of the next questions, if Carl were to have had this conversation just sort of organically, walked into Shawn's office, sat down, said what he said to me when we first met, which was, I want to do better. I want you to help me know what more I can do on my farm. Shawn would start with sort of asking some questions about what's already happening, which we've already covered. And then he might ask something like, what's already in place? What kinds of conservation measures, if any, are you already implementing? So Carl, I'd love to talk a little bit about that with you. You mentioned the wildlife cover area. You also mentioned several different kinds of crops, which is useful when you talk about crop diversity. One of the things that we encourage from a soils perspective is, diversifying your crops. So you're getting some of that. What about cover crops?
I've planted rye, totally rye for several years. I've used wheat, and then this year I used mostly radishes on the whole farm. Had them flown on into corn, standing corn.
Mm-hmm. And I think you mentioned to me in another conversation that you also spun on some wheat just kind of on your own.
Yes, ma'am. In the 10-acre field off to the side, there was radishes flown on, and I spun on a little bit of wheat in that, put up about a bushel or a little more on top of the stubble, and the wheat come up extra good. I was really pleased with how it came up. Didn't have to incorporate it at all.
And of course, the radishes, everybody who was in this neck of the woods, all those got winter killed with our big hard freeze in early or mid-December. So it's hard to see them, but the residue is probably evident when you're standing over top of this field.
Yes, ma'am.
Shawn, would you like to explore some other conservation things that he might be doing?
Yeah, so obviously the cover crops are going to play a huge part since there is quite a bit of tillage. I mean, that's the downside to having the potatoes out there is you can't implement kind of a no-till or a reduced tillage system. So if soil health is a primary concern for Mr. Frase, then the use of implementing cover crops annually is going to be paramount. I do like the radishes bringing in there. I'm sure the radishes are going to help with that compaction issue. And then spinning on the wheat is helpful as well. So again, he's done that kind of on his own, which that kind of goes back to the whole question of what can I do to improve my soil? What can I do to improve my land? And it sounds like a lot of the things he's already doing would help him as far as some other cost share programs, maybe some incentives programs like the Conservation Stewardship Program. I knew I was going to say that. That's what it was originally in the 2004 Farm Bill. But those are some options out there for people who are implementing a high level of conservation on the property. And that's what it sounds like. He's doing as much as he can with the rotation that he has. Obviously, ideally, we might consider some buffers maybe at the outlets of where most of the water is draining from the property. Looks like there should be some opportunity through the Conservation Reserve Program, which is kind of a 10-year program that the federal government comes in and rents that ground, and you kind of keep it in grasses. You're keeping it in grasses, taking it out of production. There's some other options as well from the state's perspective. The state of Maryland's looking at their 2025 WIP goals and trying to figure out ways where they can address those areas that maybe CREP isn't working for some farmers. So there are some other options that are coming out now that are the time frame's a little shorter. It's not as restrictive on the mowing, and maybe the widths of the buffers aren't as wide. So there's a lot more flexibility within that program, and that's something that I think might be conceivable in this picture down here right along the road, where you can go anywhere from 10 foot up to 100 foot or so. Yep, right there. So that's an option. It's something that I think we might be able to do on that farm. The other issue or the other concern I might have is where would that earlier in that photo over to the top left, well, I guess in this photo, the top left where a lot of that water is draining through, kind of see where that outlet is and make sure that outlet's stable. That might be just kind of that might be just a little bit of rock, a little bit of Curlex seeding. It might be just something there that we talked about and might be helpful to try to keep some of that precious topsoil on his property and out of the bay.
That's great. So we just rattled off a bunch of different kinds of programs, and many of them, all of them, are kind of identified by acronyms. If anybody, I know we have some NRCS folks in the room with us. If folks want to kind of just elaborate on what those are and what the acronyms are out loud, so that folks listening to this now or later can sort of have a better understanding. I know we mentioned CSP, which is Conservation Stewardship Program, and CREP. I'll let you take it from there, Shawn, or others in the room.
Okay, no, that's fine. No, and that's fine. And I apologize. We government, worker, we're speaking acronyms all day long. So the first two are USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, their Farm Bill programs, the Conservation Reserve Program, which is again a program to kind of offset they pay for the buffers on the property. And then there's the Conservation Stewardship Program, which kind of offers an incentive for those producers and farmers and landowners who are already setting a high standard of stewardship. The other acronym is the Maryland Agricultural Cost Share Program, or we like to call it the MAX program. And that's the one where it's the state funds for specific conservation practices. And actually right now we are implementing, or they have implemented a program where it's 100% cost share on water quality projects, which is a majority of the projects that we kind of deal with, at least in Talbot, and I'm sure in Caroline as well. So those are the most popular of the programs that we typically deal with. We did think that there might be some opportunities there through the Environmental Qualities Incentives Program, which is EQIP. You can see in this photo. Yep, you can see now the previous photo where there was the pivot irrigation, and maybe there might be some opportunities there for a potential energy audit or upgrades to the efficiency of the pivot. So there's anytime there's something coming into contact with water or soils, then that's something that there's probably a program out there where we can try to help offset some of those costs to either upgrade or maintain those systems.
That's great. Thank you. And Mark, I love the acronym soup in the chat. Yeah. Not alphabet, but acronym. We are actually kind of coming up on 12:30. It's amazing how quickly time goes by. I wanted to just sort of bring Carl back in here, because I know that you have shared with me and Shawn kind of your overall motivation for this whole exploration, like why you came up to me in the first place. We met at a Caroline County Agronomy Day after I made a little spiel about the Million Acre Challenge. And, you had talked a little bit about kind of the intersection between productivity and profitability, as well as stewardship, and then your family, your kids. And I'd love for you to have a minute to just sort of talk about that, if you're willing.
Well, just trying to save the bay, water quality, just trying to make the farm productive as I can and keep the soil in place so we don't have soil erosion, and keep the ditches clean and keep the soil in the field where it belongs and the nutrients. That's what my goal is, and be as productive and just be as productive as we can be.
And you expect that, well, I think right now you think that the farm is going to be handed off someday to your offspring.
Yes, ma'am. I have 2 daughters, And I'd love for them to manage the farm and keep it in production.
Mhm.
The farm is an easement, so for the most part, it can't be developed. And we wanted to keep it in farmland, you know.
And that's been in place for a number of years, correct?
Yes, ma'am, since 1989 or 90, long in that time frame there. 88 and 89, I believe it was when my mother put it in the easement.
That's great. Yeah, you really have a fair amount of conservation activity going on, and it may be that some of the EQIP funding for irrigation upgrades or some of the conservation stewardship program to help support things that you're already doing might be just the ticket for you. I want to allow for others in the room to ask questions. I don't need to dominate. Does anybody have something they'd like to ask of Shawn or Carl?
How did Shawn get roped into this now?
I can actually answer that question if you'd like.
Hi, my name is Dana and I'm with NRCS. I think my question was answered about the interest and motivation to be so active in conservation, and that was just answered. And I love the answer. I love the photos, and I just love everything you've done with your land. And I was just thinking the other day about the intersection between productivity and profitability, you know, using resources and conserving resources, and the delicate balance between that. So I really appreciate you speaking to that, and just wanted to say thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dana. We definitely wanted, after talking with Carl, to acknowledge, you know, what he's already doing, and the fact that he is interested in continuing to explore is really all we can ask. It's one of the things that the Million Acre Challenge folks always say, is that we're just suggesting that farmers from any production system, any size, any place, look for what they can do as a next step.
The
Other
girls at
questions?
Caroline County Extension Office have helped me an awful lot as well. Give me ideas and set me in the right direction.
Mhm.
Always been helpful.
They're wonderful. They're wonderful folks there. Yeah, definitely wonderful people in that office.
Yeah, and that goes back to how Shawn came to be with us this morning. The Caroline folks are juggling a lot right now, and they just couldn't make today work. So Shawn was willing to serve as our soil conservation representative. And, you know, the fact that Talbot and Caroline are so close to each other, Carl was equidistant sort of between the two. So we're right at 12:30. Are there other questions? We don't have to, you know, stop the program exactly at 12:30 unless folks need to hop right off. But if you have more questions, I'm sure we have time to answer them. I always mention that they say you're supposed to wait a full 8 seconds after saying something like that for people to respond. I never manage it for quite that long. But it sounds like we've done a pretty good job of addressing thoughts that folks might have had in the moment. And Carl, gosh, thank you so much for being willing. We didn't know each other very well, and I kind of, speaking of roping in, I kind of got you in on this in a big hurry, and I'm grateful that you were willing to go out on a limb like this and kind of put your farm on display, so to speak, because that means a lot. And Shawn, you've done a wonderful job of trying to sort of do the top tier of what this conversation might look like for any farmer who walked into a soil conservation district office or an NRCS office or an extension office. We're all going to try to funnel you in a similar direction and get you the resources that you need. I'll remind you to check in with us at MillionAcreChallenge.org. You can subscribe to our newsletter there. You can follow us on social media. We're always looking for folks to suggest programming or speakers or other ideas that would help support the effort to get good information and resources to farmers. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. And with that, I will wrap it up and wish everyone a really good day.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you.